So today is August the 15th. It's session 11 in the study guide on page 100 if you want to follow along. But the title is called Where is the Balance? We're in Ecclesiastes. The verses today are 7, 11 through 22. And the title is Where's the Balance? The wise person realizes God offers wisdom to the imperfect. So the first two-thirds of this was about, it was out of the book of Job. And then now we're in Ecclesiastes, which was written by, well, we presume it was Solomon. And really, the book of Ecclesiastes is about wisdom and just different stories that Solomon wanted to pass on as a teacher. So the introduction, so think about this as if it applies to you or somebody you know. And it's on page 100. It says, we live on a fine line if we think too lowly of ourselves. So let me step back before I say this. So you can think of yourself, you can be proud of yourself or proud, you can have self-confidence. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are people that are very insecure and don't have much confidence, even if they're, I kind of joke with you guys, even though they're very intelligent, they're smart, they're attractive. It's just maybe the personality I was when I was a kid. I was very insecure. Didn't have a lot of confidence, although I knew I had brains and was smart, but I was just very, very shy. That changed over the years, obviously. I'm not so much shy anymore. But so there's a spectrum, and there were people when I was in high school, or even going through school, ones that are very confident, and that's a good thing to be confident. You just got to watch how confident you be, and it's like talking about Amy. I mean, you're an athlete. You're on teams that it's not just a kind of try out and okay, you're part of the team. This is when you're talking about travel or club teams, they're very selective, and a lot of things are like that. Okay, but anyway, so what this says is, if we think too lowly of ourselves, we see ourselves as being so broken, we are not salvageable. So if you really take that to the extreme of having no confidence or being insecure, you can really start to think, wow, I can't do anything, or I don't know anything, or I don't have any friends, or I can't talk to boys, or I can't talk to girls, or whatever the thing is. If you dwell on that, you can really take it to a bad place of just thinking that you're not salvageable. Now, of course, the lesson is with respect to, we're going to turn this towards how God helps us with wisdom and trying to avoid sin and that sort of thing. But in real life, that's where it can go to, and it can take you to a really dangerous place. But it says if we think too highly of ourselves, we see no need for God or his forgiveness. Okay, so at the other end of the spectrum, if you're overconfident, if you're arrogant, you may think not just that I don't need God, but I don't need anything. I don't need anybody else. I can take care of it all myself. And it's good to feel like you're self-sufficient. You can take care of yourself, but we need to remember that there's in every person there's that we kind of call it that God-shaped hole. Only God can fill. Right? So it says, if we think too highly of ourselves, we see no need for God or his forgiveness. And again, that's the point of the lesson, is that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We all need that forgiveness and to fill that God-shaped hole with God himself. So we need to find balance to being broken by sin and yet still created in the image of God. Right? So the reason that we are sort of lowly is we should recognize that we are sinful, and that causes a problem. But that we can trust God to restore that and give us that confidence and strength. Again, that's when I pray a lot of times. I want to be able to fix things. When I have a problem in my life, I want to be able to take care of myself. If my car breaks, I want to be able to fix it. Right? If I've got a test coming up, I want to be able to study for it. Hopefully, I've paid attention in class and learned enough to have a basis, but I want to be able to study. But there's group studies. There's all kinds of ways to do things. So we want to be self-sufficient, but there's nothing wrong with, and I highly encourage you, even if you feel self-sufficient, just to throw that little prayer out to God and say, God, help me to do, my prayer is not help me to get an A+ on this test. That's what I want to pray. Help me to do my best. All right. And then let God help you take care of that. Whatever that problem that you have is, you can always ask for God's help. Okay, so I'm going to read I'm just going to go right to CSB on this one, because rather than read the King James and then come back to it. Let's see, so verses 11 through 22. And since that's what's in our study guide, let me just start with that. Okay. Verses 11 through 22 of chapter 7, it says, Wisdom is as good as an inheritance and an advantage to those who see the sun, because wisdom is protection, as silver is protection, but the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. So we'll come back and see why he's talking about, silver or money is good, but also knowledge and wisdom is also good. Verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can straighten out what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that no one can discover anything that will come after him. You see this subtitle, Avoiding Extremes, which is kind of what the introduction said. In my futile life, I have seen everything. Someone righteous perishes in spite of his righteousness, and someone wicked lives long in spite of his evil. Don't be excessively righteous, and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked, and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp the one, and do not let the other slip from your hand, for the one who fears God will end up with both of them. Wisdom makes the wise person stronger than 10 rulers of a city. There is certainly no one righteous on the earth who does good and never sins. Don't pay attention to everything people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For in your heart you know that many times you yourself have cursed others. There's a lot of little pearls in this passage. And so I'm going to kind of just go through and hit the highlights out of the study guide to hit a couple of things. So there's two main parts of this. The first one is this, when he's talking about wisdom is as good as an inheritance and an advantage to those who see the sun. And then he talks also about silver or money, worldly possessions, how that's also good. And so let's just get into that. So it says, I'm on page 102, and it said for verses 11 and 12, the first two. It says there's an observation followed by an explanation. Okay, so the main purpose of both these verses 11 and 12, where it says wisdom is as good as an inheritance and advantage to those who see the sun, because wisdom is protection as silver is protection. The main purpose of both verses is to espouse or advocate the high value and desirability of wisdom. That's what Ecclesiastes is all about, wisdom. Not just knowledge, not just knowing things, but being able to apply it in your life and to those around you. That if I know that you're a very smart person, you can study a book. See, I've always had an ability. I have a very good short-term memory that I could read something and kind of remember it long enough to maybe get through the test tomorrow, right? What's probably better would be to kind of study along and go over the course of the semester or the 2 or 3 weeks that you're learning something, so that you actually learn it and it's long-term. It goes into your brain forever, like math, times tables or skills that you really are going to need for the rest of your life. But I've always been able to kind of see something and remember it. So if I study the night before and even in the morning right up until the test, it's kind of burned on my brain, and it can help me get through a test. That's a good thing, but it's better to have that long-term memory. All right. So it says the first part of verse 11 states that gaining wisdom is as good as an inheritance. Now, what's the purpose of an inheritance? You hope that well, or what else? What else could you inherit?
Land.
Correct. What else? Animals. Yes. Cars. House. Right. So an inheritance. People look at an inheritance as its possessions. Right. From who knows who. Could be from a parent, grandparent, maybe somebody that you don't really know, a friend, a relative. Just as an anecdote, my dad and my brother and I went to an auction yesterday. A man died, and they were auctioning off his land and his possessions. Some like construction equipment, bulldozer, excavator, tools, that sort of thing. And it was interesting. we saw somebody that my brother knew, and we were talking to him. He was saying how when this gentleman died, everything he had, he left to charity. He left it to, I think he said, and I don't remember exactly, Alzheimer's.
Oh, was it Scott Jarvis?
It sure was. You know about that?
Yeah. Were you? I'm sure you didn't do it, but there's land near the GB shoes that he owns.
That's correct. It was all sold yesterday.
Do you know who bought it?
We can talk about that after Sunday school, but I do know who bought it, and land is very expensive here now. I'll put it that way. But anyway, what this guy was saying was that when he died, I don't know that I knew his. I don't know if his parents were still alive. I don't know if he was ever married or had any kids or anything, but he left everything to charity, and he kind of said maybe it was the Cancer Society, Alzheimer's, something about Alzheimer's. But what this gentleman said, and I don't know why or how he may have known it, but he said that a bunch of Scott's cousins showed up when it was time to read his will, people that had nothing to do with him for a lot of their life. And again, this is what somebody said, but the lesson is there nonetheless, whether it's exactly true or not. People who hadn't really had much to do with him during his life showed up at his, when they were going to read his will, maybe expecting or maybe hoping that he would remember them, well, everything he had went to charity, so they got nothing. And again, I don't know if that's exactly true. That's what this person said. The point of that is, you may expect an inheritance, and hopefully, we're all taken in the rapture. That's I want you to live a good long life. I want to be maybe 150, so that Mandy and Jess can be 120, and Emery can be 198 or 100, or however old she is. So we all have a good long life, and then we're taken in the rapture. Who knows how long that will be? But when particularly as tragic as it might be, when a grandparent or a parent passes away, you sort of expect that you will inherit something, some more than others, right? Land, cars, money, and that's an important thing. So that's kind of what you think of when you think of inheritance. Well, what Solomon says here is wisdom is as good as an inheritance. So he's saying an inheritance is a good thing because that kind of adds stuff to you, to your possessions, to you, maybe a little bit of wealth that just helps you. Hopefully you don't need it. You've made your own way in life, and you don't need an inheritance to help you get through. But it's always nice to have a little bit extra something come, right? That hopefully you can keep and pass on to your kids, or sell it if you needed it in a time when you needed money or whatever. Because it says wisdom is protection as silver is protection. So when he's talking about silver, he's talking about money, possessions, livestock, cattle, because back then they traded a lot of things, right? So how is silver or possessions a protection? What does that do for you? Silver is a possession. What do you do with money? Buy the things you need, maybe, or if it wasn't money, if it was a trading system, if you needed food, or you could use those, you could slaughter a cow or a goat or a sheep, and you could eat that, or you could trade it to someone for clothes, shoes, tools, right? If someone worked on your house, you could pay them with that. So that's kind of what the silver as protection means. It has value. It has a use. It shouldn't be what your life is all about. But it says, okay, so verse 12, wisdom is protection as silver is protection, but the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. And the way I read that is, it's not necessarily that wisdom preserves your life on earth, because we're all going to die or we're all going to be raptured. But what that wisdom does is it helps you both in this world and it helps you in the next one. Because if you have that godly wisdom, you know what the importance of salvation is, and then you have that preservation of your eternal life. All right. So there's how he kind of explains. Let me just check the study guide here. It says, the first part of verse 11 states that gaining wisdom is as good as an inheritance. They are similar in that both wisdom and an inheritance are passed on from one generation to another. So you don't have to get wisdom from your parents or your grandparents. I mean, as a matter of fact, it's just a fact of life that different people are able to pass on different levels of knowledge or wisdom, right? And even if you look at someone and say that person ain't passing on any wisdom or knowledge to anybody, well, that's not necessarily true, right? Because if nothing else, if you see someone who is not a good example, whether it be a friend, a parent, a relative, whatever it is, a brother or a sister, or just a stranger that you see in the news. If you see someone that's a bad example that you think, okay, they're not passing any wisdom, well, what can you learn from them? If nothing else, you can learn, I don't want to be like that. I don't want that to happen to me. So even in a sort of a sideways way, everybody can pass on some type of wisdom or knowledge. Okay, so never discount that. All right. So anyway, they're similar in that both wisdom and an inheritance are passed on from one generation to another, and that's what you hope. We have our life lessons, like I was kind of joking this morning. What was our life lesson this morning? I've already forgotten it. So there's just little tidbits that I've learned in my life. Last week, that's what we talked about. Is hopefully parents want to pass on the lessons that they've learned to their kids, so that they don't have to relearn that lesson. As a general rule, I would say people need to learn on their own. It's just our stubborn will. But anyway, it says an inheritance is meant to be a blessing to the one that receives it. Likewise, the one who receives wisdom is greatly blessed. Okay. Now, to relate this back to a godly wisdom, I'll read from the bottom of page 102. We understand how financial wealth provides protection in a financial crisis. We talked about that. But how does wisdom offer protection? The wisdom that others pass down provides a tried and true way of maneuvering through life. Learn the lessons of others so you don't have to learn them for yourself, or at least maybe you won't have to learn the whole lesson. You may want to touch that hot stove as a very elementary example. If you were when you were young, if you saw Eli burn his hand on a stove, you go, "Wow, I wonder what caused that." So you should have learned that. Well, you don't know until you either do it or someone tells you, right? You just, oh, well, I'm going to reach up here and psh, ow. Well, if you saw it, you go, I wonder what that was. Well, maybe as you get a little older and tall enough to reach up there, you think, what was that made him jerk his hand back? And you, instead of like he just, kind of put his hand up there because he was reaching for something, you go, maybe you're a little more cautious, right? And when your hand gets up there, wow, something's getting warm up here. Oh, now it's getting hot before you grab it. And maybe you go, okay, maybe that's what happened to him, right? You learn something. So there's different stages of learning too, right? So you may have to learn lessons, but you may not have to learn the whole lesson of actually getting the blister. All right, but it says, when thinking about the wisdom that those who fear the Lord inherit from Him, and as God's children, as a saved person, you are a child of God. You are grafted into the family of God. You are a joint heir, which means you will inherit, joint heir with Jesus. When you're thinking about the wisdom that those who fear the Lord inherit from Him, the security of this wisdom, so the value of it, the benefit of it, is even greater because it not only provides security in this life, but also in the life to come. That's what I was talking about. It's in both lives. All right, verse 13. Consider the work of God, for who can straighten out what He has made crooked? This is kind of a rhetorical question. So anything that God has done, whether He made something crooked, whether He has allowed something bad to happen in your life, or whatever it is, can you fix something that God has done? Can you change something that God has done? And of course, it says the teacher asked a rhetorical question of, who can straighten out what God has made crooked? The emphatic answer to that question is nobody can. Nobody can change what God has done. And whether it's perceived as a good thing or a bad thing, it's God's perfect will, for His perfect will, that He has done that or allowed it to happen. All right. It says having wisdom involves recognizing God created everything. I think we all know and believe that, and does all things according to His own purposes that we may or may not understand. What is more, He is in control of everything. When you think about the story of Job, when God allowed Satan to take everything away from Job, and it wasn't to punish Job, it was to teach Satan a lesson. And if you remember it from that perspective, when people say, how come God lets people die? How come, like this person yesterday, why did God make that tree fall down on a moving car and kill somebody, put 3 other people? Because there are people that will use that to kind of attack your faith or your religion. How can you believe that there's a loving God who allowed that to happen? And the truthful answer is, I don't know why God allowed that tree to fall on a car and kill someone. Imagine the timing of that, right? You're driving along. Maybe I don't know how old they were. Think about Tyler. You just got your license. You're taking your siblings, you're taking friends or whatever it is. Hey, let's go up and go down Sliding Rock. Did that. I don't know if I ever went down Sliding Rock because it was always cold and bumpy in my mind, so I don't think I ever did it. But I sure went up there a lot of times. Went to the hatchery, Pink Bed, to the Looking Glass Falls. It was just a thing you do because as a kid, you get your license. Man, I want to go do something. I don't care what it is, but I'm going somewhere, right? And so imagine if it's a car load of kids, and that's because that's happened. That tree falls and hits that car. God, why did you let that happen? Can I understand it? Absolutely not. And who knows? Maybe the purpose of it is at your funeral, someone says, well, the good thing is that as best as I knew, Tyler was saved. And I know where he's at, right? And maybe someone that came to that, a friend who is just that your best friend, just mourns and misses you, and they hear that message and they go, these people are sad because Tyler's gone, but they're happy. Well, how can that be? They're happy that he's in a better place, right? What place is that? Maybe that influences or helps them. You never know, as my point. You cannot understand some things. But we have to know is God created everything, does all things according to his own purposes. So it says, therefore, it is wise to submit to God as he works out his will, because nobody can change what God has done, is doing, or will do. God always knows what is right and does what is right at the right time, in the right way, and to the right extent. That's a pretty good way to put it, isn't it? God can't be wrong. Wrong and God can't be in the same room. A lie and God can't be anywhere near each other. Sin and God can't be anywhere near each other. Everything he does is right at the right time for the right purpose, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And you may not understand it, but I hope that you believe it. Even in those times when you're just going, how could this happen? All right. Now, verse 14. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. So here's some good advice right here. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And that's natural, right? When things are going well, it's good. It's easy to be happy. And I would submit, joy and happy, we've talked about that before. Happy is a temporal thing, meaning temporary. Happy can change the sad in a heartbeat. Man, I was all happy when I went to school this morning. Then the teacher said, okay, pop quiz, take out your pencil and paper. And my happiness went from happy to uh-oh, and maybe in an instant. Or maybe you're like me, and I said, yes, another pop quiz. Does anybody really do that? I don't think anybody really does that. I didn't either. But maybe you go, okay, we're having a pop quiz, and you're like, oh my goodness, what's it going to be? Okay, we're going to do the 3 times table. Well, I remember that one. Okay, this may not be so bad. But your happiness can go to sad very quickly, right? Your joy, that's a deeper thing. Joy is something that's inside you. And again, we talk in Sunday school and as a Christian about the joy that you get from being saved. And that means once that God-shaped hole is filled, no matter what, from that moment on, you're saved forever, right? And so even in those hard times, it's hard to explain to people, but you have 2 things. You have a joy that people may not be able to understand, and you have that, we just read it this week, right? That peace that passeth all understanding, that even in hard times, you may not understand it, but I know that God is in control. Look at the world right now, the United States, the things are going on. So an article headline yesterday that said, and this is in a national news website, that Asheville is in the top 10% of the most violent cities in the country. Top 10% of violent cities in the United States of America. There's a lot of cities in the United States of America, thousands and thousands and thousands. Top 10%. And the article is talking about because one of the things Asheville has done is they decided to defund the police to an extent, take away money from the police budget. Now, smart people and I'm going to put my tongue in my cheek a little bit. I don't want to offend anyone, but I'll say smart people like us, who I like to say have some common sense, I hope. Let me put it this way. If there's more police, do you think there's going to be less violence and crime? To me, it's intuitive. If there are more police, there's going to be less violence and crime. If there's less police, is there going to be more violence and crime? Certainly there's a possibility of it, right? So when you take money away from the police, some people may have naturally expected, ooh, boy, I don't know that this is going to work out well. Well, now, apparently, the news, the statistics are bearing that out, okay? So that's a whole different issue, but let's go back to the joy and peace. I mean, the happy versus joy. and the peace that passes all understanding. That's something that we have. Okay. So in the day of prosperity, when things are going well, it's easy to be happy. But it also says in the day of prosperity, be joyful. So you want to have that too. But, so here's as Richard says, that change of direction. What about in the day of adversity? What does adversity mean? In a day of adversity, a day of challenge, badness, something's going on that's not desirable in our lives. In the day of adversity, consider. And so what does consider mean? When the Bible tells me to consider, it means, okay, stop, think. And the pilot analogy is, when you're in an airplane, particularly if you're in an airplane by yourself, which I did for a lot of years, when something goes wrong, and thank God there were very few times in my career in the Air Force that things went really bad wrong. But I've had to shut down one of the engines in my 2-engine airplane, and that gets your attention. When one of the two gets shut down because there's a problem with it, you think, well, sure, the other one keeps working until I get on the ground. But anytime something would happen, a light would come on, and lights don't come on for no reason. You go, okay, what is that? Okay, that's not a good one. What they would tell us is the first thing you do is don't start doing things, don't panic. They would say, and y'all may not understand this because you probably don't have one, but the old watches that you used to have to wind to make them work, right? They would say, the first thing you need to do is wind your watch. Now, what does that mean? Wind your watch. If I'm winding my watch, what?
Taking time to see how long it's been on.
Well, there's also don't focus on, okay, I've got to fix this problem right now. Take a minute, because this is when you're winding your watch, it's what I like to refer to as a mindless activity. It doesn't take a lot of thought or brain to wind my watch, right? So what it does is it mentally detaches you from this. You're going to get a shot of adrenaline. Your heart rate might go up because you're thinking, okay, I'm in an airplane, I'm above the ground, something's going wrong. A lot of bad things can happen. What am I going to do? Wind your watch. Just stop. Take a breath. And this applies to anything you're doing, okay? Driving, something weird happens. Where does your attention go? Okay, I need to focus first on stay on the road. You see an accident ahead of you or see something going on, stay on the road. Think about how I'm going to avoid this. You don't need to worry about changing the radio station, right? Or replying to that text that your best friend just sent you while you're driving. Your priorities go, okay, what's going on here? Focus on the task. Stop the car. Now I can change the radio station or answer the text or whatever, okay? So, in the day of adversity, consider, stop, and think. God has made the one as well as the other. We just talked about this, right? God allows good to happen. God allows bad to happen. He's made both so that no one can discover anything that will come after him, all right? So it says in the first instance, when you're experiencing good times, rejoice and enjoy God's blessings. However, when you experience seasons of adversity or challenge or problems, then you must consider. So, okay, it says this echoes the beginning of verse 13. Consider the work of God, and to underline this one, it says, what work of God should one consider in times of adversity? We must remember that like the good times, the difficult times are also from the hand of God. Okay, can't explain it. Now, you could say, that maybe there's some sin in my life, and maybe this is a judgment from God. Well, that's what Job's friends told him. You've obviously done something wrong, and God's punishing you. Well, they were wrong, 100% wrong. And God actually came later and told them, fellas, you were wrong. You should be ashamed of yourself. I ought to spank you. I mean, this is paraphrasing, right? He didn't explain to Job, and that's important too. God came and spoke to Job. We talked about this during that lesson, which was I never really thought of it this way. But God came and talked to Job. But the thing he did not do was explain to him, Job, I wasn't punishing you. I was teaching Satan a lesson. You think if God would have told Job that Job would have went, oh, what a relief. I'm glad. Now I know I didn't do anything wrong. God didn't tell him that, which I can't understand why he didn't. But what it goes to is we must trust God. There's a reason for everything. God knows it. I may or may not. So it's kind of pointless. I mean, it's good, I would say, if something bad's going on in your life, to search yourself and say, is there something that I need to fix between me and God? If there's something that you know of, then I would certainly encourage you to do that. Maybe your problem goes away, maybe it doesn't. But it's always good to make sure that you're always as right as you can be with God. We're talking about Haiti. How many people heard about what happened in Haiti a couple of days ago? Earthquake, 7.4 on the Richter scale, which is a big earthquake. Haiti, back in, I don't remember if it was in the 90s, there was a hurricane that blew through there, and I mean, it destroyed Haiti. Destroyed. It's a little island, right? Destroyed them. They still have not recovered from that. And the United States actually put a lot of money toward helping them. And it's for some reason, it's just never gotten there. That's a whole different issue. But, we as Americans, we are a very generous people. I like to think Christians are generous. Non-Christians can be generous too. We're a very generous nation, a very generous people. And so we want to help because it's the right thing to do, right? If we can. That money's never gotten there. So they've never recovered from that. A month or two ago, their prime minister or whatever he is, their leader, was assassinated. Someone killed him. Okay. Wow. That's a kind of a significant thing to a country. And they're small. It's a little island. It's small. And then a couple of days ago, a 7.4 earthquake devastated that country again. Why does that happen? Now, we were talking this morning, I think, me and Mandy, or I don't know if you were hearing it, or maybe yesterday, now in Haiti, there are a lot of people there that practice voodoo. And I don't know a lot about it, except I know that it ain't Christian. Okay. Now, in my mind, I think, man, God has punished or allowed a lot of bad things to, and people are people. You want to think the best of people, hope the best for them, help them. Well, is it because they're not godly? Well, if that was the case, there'd be a lot of places in this world that were getting hurricanes and earthquakes and assassinations, right? And maybe this is the leading edge. I don't know. But it kind of makes you ponder. So on a personal level, if you can make yourself as best relationship as you can with God, make it right when you can, as a nation. And that's my prayer for the United States right now, because we are dividing in a big way. And I don't see us coming back together because there are people out there that are encouraging this division. They have different agendas. It is tragic to see what's happening. And as we also read this week, a verse that Kim, our sister-in-law, sent out, it goes back to the old 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, so Christians, it was meant, this was back in Solomon's day. Solomon prayed to God. God, I know we're going to fail. You've given us rules and we're going to fall and fail. But if we will turn back to you, will you hear us? Will you remember us? Will you restore us? And God answered Solomon. God told Solomon, okay, if you do the wrong thing as a people, if you'll turn back to me, yes, I'll remember you. And that was that verse. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves. So, be humble, recognize it, humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. So there's a lot of elements to that. Humility, pray, right? Seek my face, turn back to me, to God, and then turn from your wicked ways as well. So not only are you turning toward me, but you're turning from that's the repent, turn away. Then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. Okay, that's God's promise to His people. Well, if us as Christians would try to start that movement in the United States, let the non-believers see us first, do that, and then maybe that would encourage them, perhaps God will restore us. I don't know that He will, but it requires an effort, making yourself right. Okay, I've got just a minute or two to go through the last part of this. And so the second part, avoiding extremes, kind of talked about that. But what God is saying, can you be too wise? He's not saying don't be, don't ever stop trying to gain wisdom and knowledge. What He's saying is don't go to the extreme that you're arrogant and be that person that doesn't need anybody else, doesn't need God. So you can become too wise in a selfish, worldly way. I don't need any help. I don't need God. I've made my own way in life, and I can continue to make my own way. Because as you see in verse 15, have you ever wondered, like Solomon says, in my futile life, and Solomon was the wisest king ever. Okay, his life, I would say, wasn't necessarily futile, but in the big scheme of things, we're here for a short time, and that was a lesson a week or two ago, nobody's going to remember you when you're gone, unless you're the president, or unless you do something really significant that puts you in the history book. But think about this in your own life, if this is true. In my life, I have seen everything. Someone righteous perishes in spite of his righteousness, and someone wicked lives long in spite of his evil. Have you ever seen that? I mean, do you see people around you or in your life that seem to be evil, wicked, not the best people, and yet they always come up smell like roses, right? And people who try to do their best to be godly and righteous, sometimes things aren't going well for them. And the example to me, and I think of is with Tina, who is just a dear friend, graduated from high school with her. We've known her. I mean, I literally grew up in this church with her. I'm younger than you guys. I've known Tina. What a good woman she is, a godly woman. And the things in her, with Jeff, you can never explain why someone gets a disease, right? And do you wonder, why is that? And you pray God just work your will in her life. Again, my request is you just restore that family, physically heal, but that's what I want. But just like Jesus said in the garden the night before he was crucified, God, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Don't make me go through this. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what thou wilt. And that's I think of that as the perfect human prayer. God, here's what I'm asking you. Here's my input on how to make it right. But I know that I don't know the whole picture, so I trust you to help me. So anyway, I think everybody has seen or knows someone that is righteous, that's good, that's suffered or suffering. And at the same time, people that aren't so good at people that just seem to flourish. Okay. Can't explain it. But here's what I'll tell you is at the end of that life, rapture or death, there will be a reckoning. And so I don't want to, it's hard sometimes to say, you act mean and bad like that. Well, you're going to get yours. Well, that's not the right attitude either. What your attitude should be, and I'm guilty of this myself, is to pray for that person. Pray for them that God will work in their life, either through me, through somebody else, through Holy Spirit, but say a prayer for them. Okay? And that's what the Bible instructs us to do. That's what Jesus instructs us. You not punch them in the nose, pray for them. Okay? That is our obligation to them. All right. Because there will be a judgment, and you should not be joyful or wish that anyone, when you're in hell, you'll see. That's a dangerous thought. It's natural, it's human. But catch yourself, before the thought completes itself, or ask forgiveness. Okay. Questions, comments. I'll end with the verse that's in. I don't remember where it is, or the context of it, but. God's advice through a prophet was, he said, do not repay evil for evil. And you may have heard this expression. People shorten it to say, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. What the Bible actually says is, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Now that's just a statement of fact. And again, it should never be used in a vindictive way. With that knowledge, that should help us to understand, I may not be able to change this person, but I can pray for them. All right. Questions, comments, suggestions? We got 6 people here. I'm glad to see every one of you. Okay. I'll send the reminder out this week. We'll announce it up there this morning. Mac and cheese, baked beans. And think about to serve, and this will go really more to people who help you prepare it, but for probably 8 people. But who knows? We may have a bunch of people. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you again for this day, and I thank you for each one that's here. Thank you for your word and the lessons that we can learn out of it, Lord. And I thank you for allowing me to teach this Sunday school class and to try to impart your wisdom, God. But I pray that you'll help these kids to get into your word themselves so that they can read it for themselves in some way, whether it be Bible stories or actually reading the Bible. I pray that you'll be with each of them this week as they get prepared with their last week of freedom before school starts, Lord, and that you'd encourage them to give them the desire to go back and to take away any fears or any other wrong thoughts or bad thoughts that they may have, that you would just encourage them, Lord. And I just pray that you'll help us to be an example for you in all we do. And I ask you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Like his alarm, his wake-up alarm.
That is your wake-up alarm?